for this webinar to discuss the Northwest Power and Conservation Council's Plan 2021. We would like you all to put your first name, your pronouns, and the organization in the chat rather than do introductions. We would want to focus on the substance. I just wanted to note that I'm joining this event from Seattle, and I want to acknowledge that my home sits on the traditional land of the Coast Salish tribes, specifically the Duwamish, the Suquamish, the Stillaguamish, the Muckleshoot peoples, past and present. And I honor with gratitude the land itself and these tribal communities. I hope you will do the same in honoring those lands wherever you are today. Let's move. Thank you for progressing the slides. I want to also thank in our staff, Kat Plimpton and Patty Rincon, for their work in putting this webinar together. It always is challenging logistically to get it organized. So thank you to Patty and Kat.
Attending a course.
What's something on Washington State Energy?
If you have your microphone on, please mute yourself. Just a moment on expectations with the chat. We've all been doing these webinars for quite a while, but let's keep the chat conversation focused on the topics that we're talking about today, what the speakers are doing. It's really important that we are respectful of the speakers and the other participants, and make sure that we're focused on the topics at hand and not try and get off on too many other tangents that get people focused on something else rather than what we're trying to engage each other on, which is Plan 2021 and the issues at the Power Council and the opportunities for a lot of input. So we'll be monitoring the chat, and we'll remind you to stay focused on the topics at hand as we progress. Okay, let's keep moving. So I think most everybody is aware of who the coalition is. We have been around since 1981, really originally founded to watchdog this very process that we're engaged in today, to make sure to put a model plan together to help the Power Council and the 4 states in Bonneville really see their way towards a clean energy future. And so the fact that here we are in 2021 doing the same work is a testament to all of you as members of the coalition and our community for continuing to do that watchdog work. And now I'm going to turn it over to Lauren McCloy, who is our policy director, and she and Fred Hewitt are on point for working with the Power Council and on Plan 2021. And they will both be engaged in putting together our talking points, our comments, and providing support for all of you during this comment period. So thanks, everybody. Lauren, you're on.
Thank you, Nancy, for that introduction. Hello, everyone. I'm Lauren McCloy. I'm the policy director here at Northwest Energy Coalition. And today, what you're seeing is the first of 2 webinars, which we are hosting on the draft Northwest Power Plan. The content will be the same for both of the webinars, but we just wanted to provide some options for folks to accommodate your schedule as we enter the public comment hearing on the draft. So I will start by first just going through a quick introduction on what is the Northwest Power Plan. Many of you know this, but the power plan emerged out of the passage of the Pacific Northwest Electric Power Planning and Conservation Act, 1980, otherwise known as the Northwest Power Act. The act was passed to address primarily the allocation of benefits from the federal hydropower system, and it also established a regional planning body representing 4 Northwest states tasked with developing a regional power plan and fish and wildlife program. Notably, the Northwest Power Act puts energy efficiency and conservation first as a priority resource for the region, and it requires the Bonneville Power Administration to follow the power plan and address fish and wildlife restoration by implementing the Fish and Wildlife Program. And also, for the first time, the Act in 1980 required BPA to conduct formal consultation between tribal nations and to consult with other stakeholders in the development of the plan. The power plan is updated by the council every 5 years, and it provides a 20-year forecast of demand for the region and then outlines a long-term resource strategy, which serves as a guide for resource planning in the region. It also focuses on a 6-year action plan period, which will be the focus of a lot of what we're talking about today, where it sets specific targets for energy efficiency, adopts a model conservation standard, and identifies other areas of work for the council and BPA. So why is the plan important? Well, the plan is important for 2 primary reasons. First, because it guides Bonneville's resource decisions, especially energy efficiency, but it also informs hydropower system operations and long-term resource needs for BPA and its customers. Secondly, it serves as a resource for states, regulators, and private utilities in the region who rely on the council's modeling and data about the Northwest Power System to inform policy and develop their own resource plans. For example, the Washington Energy Independence Act requires utilities to use the latest version of the Northwest Power Plan to develop their energy efficiency targets. And then the model conservation standard adopted by the council is widely used throughout the region and the council's advisory committees, such as the Regional Technical Forum. The public comment period on the draft is a really critical part of the process, not only because it serves to fulfill the council's purpose to provide for the participation and consultation of the states, local governments, consumers, and the public at large as required by the Act, but also because it helps the council gauge whether the plan as proposed will address the region's needs. The council itself was formed by an interstate compact between the 4 Northwest states in 1981, and it consists of 8 members appointed by the governors of the states, each one representing, one for each state representing power issues and wildlife issues. And if you want to know more about who your council members are, you can read all about them on the council's websites. Here, the council chair is from Oregon, Richard Devlin, the vice chair from Washington, Guy Norman, and you can read about the rest of the members from Montana and Idaho and Washington and Oregon on the council's website. BPA, as many of you know, is a federal power marketing agency, which primarily markets the power from the federal hydropower system, as well as several private power plants and the Columbia Generating Station. It also owns and operates the largest high voltage transmission system in the region and overall supplies about 1/3 of the region's electricity. BPA is overseen by an administrator selected by the U.S. Department of Energy. And this year, John Hairston, a 3-decade veteran of the agency, was selected as administrator. So what do you need to know about the 2021 plan? The 2021 plan is the 8th Northwest Power Plan, and it really comes at a critical time for the region when we're going to need solutions now that put us on a pathway to transform the electricity system over the next 20 years. The power plan must first provide a solution for replacing the energy and capacity services from retiring coal plants while maintaining reliability and affordability. It must also address the fact that Oregon and Washington have adopted aggressive economy-wide greenhouse gas reduction goals, which will require widespread deployment of clean energy and increase electric load due to electrification of transportation and buildings. It must also address the increased frequency of extreme weather events, droughts, wildfires, and heat waves in the Pacific Northwest. These events are becoming more common, which obviously puts stress on the power system. And it must also address the fact that changes to hydropower system operations are going to be necessary to recover declining salmon populations. So this plan includes some notable, oh, I'm sorry, did I get there? Oh, yes. Okay. This plan includes some notable progress on renewable energy, understanding the impacts of climate change, and incorporating equity considerations into power planning. The council has proposed 3,500 megawatts of renewable energy, mostly solar and wind, during the action plan period. And notably, this is the largest build out of renewable energy ever included in the power plan. So that obviously is something that we like. Very exciting to see the cost of renewables come down and those resources being incorporated into the plan. On equity, the council has also taken some initial steps to incorporate an equity lens into regional electric system power planning. Earlier this year, it hosted a system integration forum on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the power planning process, and identified a gap in equity data. And the draft plan includes a recommendation for the region to perform a gap analysis to identify areas where further research and data are going to be needed. The goal is to ultimately develop a regional framework to improve future power planning analysis, including future council power plans and regional utility integrated resource plans. So this is a definite sign of progress on this issue, which has never really been addressed before in a prior version of the power plan. It also, first time ever, adopts a climate adjusted baseline. The council consulted with climate scientists to incorporate elements of 3 different climate models and to downscale those to the Northwest. And the results show that climate change has already started to shift monthly Northwest hydropower and increase peak demand, with an overall shift towards summer peaks and more extreme hot and cold weather events. So this is a really important innovation in this version of the plan, which we are advocating be included in the final plan and then also adopted by utilities in their own integrated resource planning. However, we do have some concerns about the resource strategy proposed in this plan. We're especially concerned about the diminished role that the council proposes for energy efficiency during the action plan period 2022 through 2027. For the first time, the council has adopted a range instead of a point target for regional energy efficiency acquisition. And the low end of the range, which is 750 average megawatts, essentially cuts the energy efficiency target in half from the 7th plan. The high end of the range, 1,000 average megawatts, is lower than the 1,400 megawatt target that was in the 7th plan, but at least maintains the trajectory of current EE program budgets. The council also proposes to reduce BPA's share of the regional target, proposing that Bonneville acquire between 270 and 360 megawatts of energy efficiency by the end of 2027. This is about 36% of the regional target compared to 42%, which has been Bonneville's share historically. So this is a bad idea, we think, for all the regions, with all the reasons that we're highlighting here on this slide. The fact that the Northwest has long been a leader in energy efficiency, and it's been one of the main reasons we've been able to keep utility rates and bills low in our region. Energy efficiency programs are also popular with customers, provide significant employment and local economic benefits, and are critical to implementing equitable climate policy. And we do think that reducing BPA's role is unfair to customers of small rural utilities, since many rural areas rely on BPA's program as the only source of funding for energy efficiency. I would also note that the Northwest is already on track to meet the high end of the energy efficiency target that the council has proposed. And so therefore reducing the target or otherwise adjusting budgets to reflect the lower end of the target would actually result in a decrease in energy efficiency funding. This is, this would be a negative signal for energy efficiency in the region. And we would also note that BPA's preliminary findings are showing significantly more EE potential in their conservation potential assessment than what the council is showing in the action plan period. We're also concerned about the low level of demand response and lack of energy storage represented in the resource strategy. The low target for demand response conflicts with analysis conducted by the Demand Response Advisory Committee, which found significantly more demand response potential in the region. And while the draft plan includes a soft recommendation that the region should look at energy storage, the lack of energy storage in the resource strategy, particularly energy storage paired with renewables and hybrid applications, is a notable shortcoming. The council included a pathways to decarbonization scenario in the draft plan. And in general, we feel that the resource strategy represented by this scenario is more balanced, as it includes more energy efficiency, demand response, energy storage, and renewable energy overall. However, the council didn't really take the next step of incorporating findings from this scenario into the recommended resource strategy or the action plan, which we think kind of inappropriately limits its relevance in this plan. And so we're going to be looking at, are there ways that they can incorporate more of the findings from this scenario into the plan itself? So now is the time to let the council know that the draft, doesn't necessarily pass muster as written and really kind of needs some additional work. We're encouraging members and allies to weigh in with a message focused on staying the course on energy efficiency, continuing BPA's leadership role in the region, incorporating other clean energy technologies besides solar and wind, especially demand response, storage, and storage plus renewables, and recognizing the role of customer side resources, distributed generation, and electrification in meeting aggressive decarbonization goals in Washington and Oregon. The council will be hosting 4 remote public comment hearings on the draft. And while you don't have to be a resident of the host state to participate in any of the meetings, they will prioritize local participation at each of the meetings by letting those who are residents of the host states speak first. So the first one is this evening, hosted by Montana from 5 to 7 p.m. Mountain Time. Next opportunity to comment will be October 7th from 5 to 7 p.m. Pacific, hosted by Washington. After that, October 12th from 1:30 to 3:30 Pacific, hosted by Oregon. And next on October 14th, 5 to 7 Mountain, 4 to 6 Pacific, hosted by Idaho. And if you can't attend any of the public comment hearings, you also have the option of providing public comment at a regularly scheduled council meeting. To sign up to participate in a public comment hearing, you will go to the council website and submit this form. You need to select the date of the meeting in which you want to participate. You will tell them whether or not you live in the state that is hosting. You will fill out the form, and I know that this works because I've done it already, and submit your request. And at that point, your name will be added to the list of presenters, which will show on the public hearing page. And they will call on you when it's your turn to testify. Each speaker will have about 2 to 3 minutes at the public hearing. And you should also receive an email within a few minutes confirming, unless you put your email address wrong, like I just did. But if you don't, there's a contact. The council is also requesting written comments on the draft plan through November 19th. And to submit a written comment, you'll want to go to the council website and click or send an email to comments@northwestcouncil.org. And you can do that here on the council's website. I won't fill out this form, but it's pretty straightforward. Just put in your organization, your name, your email address. You can put your comments here in the form, or you can select an attachment and send a comment.
So, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Nancy.
Yeah, this is Nancy. I was just going to say, Jerry Oliver had a question. Are you ready to open up for questions?
Almost. I think we had just maybe one more slide. I just wanted to let folks know that the coalition will be submitting written comments and will also be supporting members and allies with a sign-in letter. But we do want to emphasize, we think it's important that the council hear from a variety of voices and would encourage people to submit their own comments. And here is the link to the plan. If you would like to actually read the plan and the supporting documents, you just go to the council website there. And now I'm ready for questions and discussion. Thank you, Nancy.
Awesome. Thank you, Lauren. That was a speed record. And so there's no doubt people have a lot of comments, and you can raise your hand. I think. Or put a question in the chat. And also, Kat, I think like if Terry wants to unmute himself and ask his question directly, can he do that?
Yes, he should be able to.
Okay, Terry, do you want to ask your question directly?
Sure. In my long experience with energy efficiency at BPA, one of the sort of forever unrecognized benefits was resiliency, putting it back into the hands of consumers. And I just wondered if in cutting that target, the council sort of ignored that resiliency benefit or explicitly said, well, it's not such a big thing.
Well, I'll jump in here and then Fred, I might defer to you as well. But our impression is that, and actually I think I remember this from some of the discussion at the Power Committee, is that those resilience benefits are difficult to quantify. The council has certainly discussed resiliency benefits associated with energy efficiency, but ultimately kind of punted on like, okay, well, how do we quantify that and actually put it into the cost effectiveness criteria? In general, I think one of the challenges, well, the main challenge that we're seeing for EE in this plan is essentially that the models don't really know what to do with it in a high renewables system. You know, it's simply the kind of existing models that we have are not good at valuing all of the different benefits of EE, including but not limited to resilience. And so when they encounter this kind of trade-off between cheap renewables available on the market and energy efficiency, you know, in many ways, I think that it's just the avoided cost energy is sort of driving them towards the supply side rather than the demand side of the equation. Fred, anything else you want to add there?
Yeah, and to add to resilience, you know, meaning those things that happen when the grid is really stressed out, are difficult to measure because those events are, you know, not, it's hard to predict them and what they are and how they'll, you know, what actually happens. So, for example, you know, arguably the heat wave, heat dome event of late June was that kind of resilience event, although it turned out the grid had plenty of resources to handle the surge in demand. But under other circumstances, that could have led to outages. If you have a lot of energy efficiency, that would reduce that risk or the, you know, the magnitude of that kind of resilience effect. Energy efficiency has this great property of making everything else easier to do and of protecting the system. And those are not easy to quantify, but they're very real. The other problem that we're running into, though, with the plan, and one of the well, I'm sure we'll get into this in further discussion, is that the council has several models, basically three main models that it uses. I won't go into the details. One of the models is quite good at measuring the capacity value or the reliability value of energy efficiency, the resource adequacy model the council uses, which is called Genesis. But that model is not the main model for doing the plan. That one's called the RPM, the Regional Portfolio Model. And that model is having trouble identifying the capacity value of energy efficiency. The Genesis model only acts as kind of a boundary check on the main modeling. And so this has been one of our frustrations this year. We've been conversing with some really good technical experts on modeling that really helped us this year, and a group of us have been meeting off and on through the year to examine the council's modeling issues. Their models are good, but they're not really suited to the kind of grid that we need going forward. This is a challenge we're looking at across all of the utility planning as well as the council. And the current fleet of models don't do a good job of estimating the value, the full value of, especially of energy efficiency. And this has become a real underlying problem. There are other issues with the modeling as well I won't get into now, but I think that's a really important point.
Thanks, Fred.
This is Nancy again. We had a couple questions related to the energy efficiency targets. And, does the council, Carrie Mead asks, does the council have the authority to recommend an EE target that is outside of the cost effectiveness findings? And, that's part of the earlier question about, the rationale for reducing the efficiency targets.
I could take a swing at that.
Yeah, go ahead, Fred.
The council actually, the cost effectiveness is the standard in the Northwest Power Act. That the council and Bonneville are supposed to plan for, and Bonneville is supposed to acquire, and other utilities should too, but they're not directly affected. Should acquire all cost-effective conservation, the top priority in the Power Act for the resource strategy or for the resource mix. Cost effectiveness has a lot of dimensions to it. So I would say the council has done a lot of legal assessment of that issue over the years. And the question of how you determine cost effectiveness is another modeling issue. And I won't go into the details, but I think that it's not merely a matter of the strict dollar cost. I mean, what are you measuring that against is kind of the real issue. And so there is some flexibility there, but yes, the conservation target should be all cost-effective conservation.
Tony, you have your hand raised, I see. We'll go to you.
Thank you, Nancy. Kind of a follow-up on what was the comments that you made, Fred and Lauren. And that is, you talked about the limitations of the model, but I don't really see that reflected in your comments related to energy efficiency. Is that something that the coalition is considering including in more detail in your comments to urge the council, saying your model is relatively limited in understanding this new world, and historically that efficiency has been the lowest cost, most flexible resource moving forward, and you should push you should push towards a conservative situation. In other words, assume more efficiency in this hard to model world. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so thanks, Tony, for that question. We did provide some preliminary comments in response to the staff recommendations, I want to say back in April or May. And that was certainly a key piece of what we were advocating for at that point was, you really need to try to address the fact that the model, isn't really capable of quantifying all of these things, which present additional value and which is sort of the justification for the EE preference in the Power Act. And so that will definitely be a part of our messaging as we kind of develop our own comments on the draft. I think for the purposes of, the public comment hearings and trying to help members, figure out how they want to weigh in at this stage with 2 to 3 minutes, we were not necessarily advocating that everyone get up there and talk about the models. But yes, Tony, that will certainly be part of what we're messaging going forward is the need to update the models to better address the values of the EE.
So one of the couple questions are around the state goals. So We have goals for electrification of transportation and buildings, climate commitment goals. What does the council assume about electrification and the state goals? How do they factor those into the plan?
So I'll take a crack at that, and then Fred, I might need you to weigh in as well. You know, they did look at sort of existing targets that are, you know, incorporated into state law that have been put out there and can be used for planning purposes. And those are included in the baseline. I think we did decide that, you know, we think their transportation electrification forecast sort of underestimates the electric vehicle deployment in the region. It's pretty conservative. And so we have urged them to, you know, go back and take another look at that transportation electrification scenario to make sure that, you know, we're actually building a system that's going to be adequate to serve that fastly increasing electric transportation load. I think the best information that's available on this is in the Pathways to Decarbonization scenario, which the council sort of conducted some really good preliminary analysis on, and the council staff presented to the council. But then, you know, instead of sort of taking that scenario and incorporating it into the resource strategy and the baseline going forward, they left it as a standalone analysis. So it doesn't actually use much of the work that was done in that decarbonization pathway scenario does not actually end up being in the resource strategy for the plan. Fred, anything?
Yeah, the council does a pretty thorough job of looking at the state policies and also utility announced policies, for example, Idaho Power or Avista, and not just in the Northwest, but across the entire Western interconnection, because what happens out in the rest of the West also affects us here, which is another part of our concern about how the modeling has turned out. But it doesn't directly include the effect of the Oregon HB 2021, 100% clean, or the new Washington Climate Act. And for one thing, rules have not yet been written for either of those. And for another, they both happened, you know, while pretty much after the council main modeling had already been completed. I mean, they're still doing model, they can still do some more, but there really wasn't, you know, the timing didn't really work out for that. That might be something to focus on for the, you know, update that the council typically does about 2 years after the plan comes out. You know, there's room for some more work, but the council's pretty scrupulous about reflecting all of those state requirements. Of course, then you have to interpret what those will actually mean in practice and what, you know, effect will have, particularly in California and the Southwest and the Mountain West, where a lot of new renewable energy is going to come onto the system as a result of new policies in those states. You know, it's not just the Northwest. We have a big shift in the West, which is good, but the consequences are, you know, a pretty significant shift in a lot of different aspects that the modeling has to look at. So kind of dancing around this one, I can't fault the council at all for its thoroughness in trying to reflect state policy. But the question is, are we getting the results those policies are really pointing at and toward the balanced resource mix that we really need?
Well, that, you know, I think that answers Jeff Hammerlin's question about the symbiotic relationship between efficiency and renewables. Is there's a limit in the modeling to how dynamic the results are. They're more tiered, and how they play off each other is the part where we really need new modeling to help us get there. We had a question, Brian Grunkemeyer. You wanna ask your question?
Yes, hi, thanks everyone. I'm a little bit concerned about the potential for public safety power shutoffs. And there's a huge resiliency impact to that. And unlike some of Fred's earlier comments, this is where energy efficiency actually does not help much, because a lot of the energy efficiency just reduces the total amount of load. But if the entire power line is unusable, then that's a completely different failure mode. What level of planning have we done for that to make sure that that's not a problem? And have we looked at whether we actually need to build additional transmission lines just for the resiliency aspects?
Fred, I might ask you to weigh in on this one.
Okay. Yeah, the council, first of all, the council doesn't really look at operational level detail like that very much, although they do, look at resource adequacy specifically. But I think we have to be concerned about these things happening because they are happening. The council also traditionally has not had a very deep look at transmission. We keep pushing them in that direction, but it's a power planning agency, and that's always been their perspective. And Bonneville is by far the biggest transmission owner in the Northwest and typically has taken that on. I personally have been pushing for a long time to get transmission planning and power planning more closely aligned. Beginning to happen, but we could do better on that. So the whole question of system stress from wildfires, from seismic risk, from very cold weather, you name it, is a serious one. And transmission's very expensive to build, takes a really long time. And the very first thing we should be doing to address that is, we talk about non-wires alternatives. Well, the very first thing is to do more energy efficiency. I would actually say energy efficiency can help a bit in public service power shutoff type events where you have a feeder or a transmission line or a particular area going down, because it decreases the stress in the rest of the system. And it's kind of over on the edges of it. But I think energy efficiency is still a helpful thing to have because it gives the operators more flexibility in operating the system.
Hey, Nancy, do you want me to take a swing at this?
That's Robert.
Yeah,
Robert Cromwell.
yeah, sure. Robert, if you want to go.
Sure, Brian. Hey, Robert, City Light. I can tell you that from an environmental standpoint, west of the Cascades, we really don't face the kind of conditions that have generated the public safety power shutoffs in the state of California. And even when you look east of the Cascades, call it Eastern Oregon, Eastern Washington, Idaho, Montana. Again, the environmental confluence of events that leads to those outcomes in California, we don't face on a consistent basis. It's really the combination of really dry environment with those diurnal evening winds picking up really, really fast. And the Columbia Gorge gets some of those winds, but the environment around there is not predisposed, absent human behavior, for that kind of outcome. So I can only assure you that for those of us who've had to touch it in terms of our work, there are a lot of folks thinking a lot about it. But to Fred's point, it's typically within the local utility and the wires that they have to manage.
Thanks, Robert.
Thanks, Robert. While you have the floor, did you want to ask your question?
Oh, no, I just wanted to
Way in that
back Fred up on
Okay,
it
okay.
since I've actually had to do this work.
Okay. I wonder if I could call on Phil Ritter. He asked the question, does the breakthrough model funded by the Gates Foundation do a better job of looking at energy efficiency? I don't know if Fred or Lauren's familiar with the breakthrough model. So maybe Phil, you could elaborate a little bit. Have to unmute yourself.
Yes, I do. I just Googled models for the Northwest Power Grid and came up with a website for that group that apparently has gotten quite a bit of funding from the Gates Foundation. And they've come up with some alternatives on the national power sharing grid using direct voltage or DC, super cooled lines and, that sort of thing. And they say that they have done some regional modeling, but I haven't seen it yet.
I'm not familiar with that one, Fred. I know there's a number of other models that
Yeah,
you've seen.
I haven't looked at that one in detail. I know about it. There are quite a few national and regional modeling efforts that have happened in the last couple of years. Many of them are quite good. I think in general, the national modeling people tend to undervalue energy efficiency or not really take it all that seriously. The E3 Northwest decarbonization study was pretty good on energy efficiency. I think the Evolved Energy Research and CETI Deep Decarb study was really good on energy efficiency. They did that one for the state of Washington as well as a regional one. The full potential for energy efficiency is one of the issues we've wrestled with for a long time. What looks feasible today may be quite a bit less than what we could get if we really put our mind to it. That's my view of it. It's not like anything, it's not a single bullet, single solution. What we're really saying is energy efficiency is the foundation of a strong clean energy transformation strategy. And that the coalition has had that view for, since we started. But the fact is, it's even more important now because the underlying, the big resource mix out there on the grid, other than the hydro system, is the thermal side of the region's resource is going to shift downward pretty quickly. And the faster we can do that, keep the grid stable, reliable, and cost affordable, the better. And energy efficiency, the role of it really should only be growing and growing pretty significantly. It's not all that easy a resource to deliver, as everybody involved in it knows, but we also know we can succeed. And we have a tremendous track record of, as the council keeps updating the numbers, they're now saying we have 7,200 megawatts of energy efficiency in the region, most of it in the last 15 years. That's been built up over the last 4 decades because we saw the opportunity with the Power Act and we pursued it and we stayed with it. One of the big issues in this plan is it seems to be pulling back from that perspective. I'm not saying let's go buy stuff that's not cost effective. I'm saying let's really think about, as all the questions have come in here that point out different aspects of this, where how can we describe the real value and make sure we get there.
And I think I would add to that too. I mean, making this link between where we're headed, which is a decarbonized energy system that's obviously going to have a huge role for energy efficiency. Any deep decarbonization study that you look at, energy efficiency is the first thing that you do. And so there's a little bit of just dissonance between where the council seems to be headed, which is we're going to pull back on energy efficiency and rely on the market, to supply those resources because we're struggling with the math. And what we see as being a more forward-looking approach, which is as we enter this new world of trying to decarbonize our economy, energy efficiency is going to have a new and expanded role. Sure, we may not totally understand what it's going to look like right now, but it's certainly not the time to put the brakes on it.
And that's a good kind of setup for Chris Smith's question, which is, does the plan include any gas power plants, or is it focused on new renewables and energy efficiency? And I think the answer to that is it does not include any gas. Is that right?
Yeah, so the plan does not show any build out of new gas, which is sort of a function of the resource adequacy analysis in the plan. Fred, I don't know if you want to add any more details.
Yeah, some of the early modeling late last year showed a lot of new gas, especially in the next few years. And then the council made some revisions to the modeling and the gas dropped out. The renewables stayed up and the energy efficiency and demand response and storage all went down or even to zero because this is getting into the technical weeds of the planning. But the model started showing a huge build out, which I think we will see, of renewables in the Southwest, California Southwest, and that provided both a price signal and a resource shift. That the price signal meant deeply negative prices, much more negative than we think will be likely, that diminished the value of energy efficiency. and removed the need for new gas, actually, while the state policies require the renewables to come in to meet the state RPS and clean energy standards. So we have this kind of weird interaction of model features that end up kind of isolating all the resources rather than treating them as a, as a portfolio. And as a result, the gas dropped out and is not in the current plan.
David Siddiqui, would you like to ask your question? If you want to unmute yourself.
Sure, yeah, happy to. I mean, I think I was just trying to get a sense of the extent to which the sort of time value of like GHG reductions was included in the modeling. I mean, I think we've seen pretty clearly that, just from, the sort of avoided climate damages perspective, doing that sort of on a near-term basis, actually, it's like those emissions reductions that happen sooner are clearly sort of more valuable to both, the system and society as well. And so I don't know the extent to which that was sort of incorporated in this sort of outlook in this plan in terms of that, providing some extra value to some of the near-term work.
I'm not sure, Fred, if I know how to answer that question. I think, the plan is not, I would say it's not a decarbonization plan, right? So it's not focused on sort of what is the least cost pathway to reduce emissions to comply with, for example, Washington and Oregon state emissions reduction targets. So I don't think it gets to that same level of detail about sort of doing more faster versus doing less.
Even in the pathways to decarbonization scenario.
Fred,
Well, the pathways analysis is a limited view of some very advanced work that the council staff is doing, and they're consulting with others about that right now. It's not really a finished product, really. The two things I can say about it first are that the basis for a decarbonization scenario, the council has made a very major step forward on. The climate adjusted baseline for load and for hydro and renewables. And also there is a carbon price or a carbon signal in the modeling already, basically at roughly federal social cost, current federal social cost of carbon levels. So that's already included. The problem is the models don't seem to know what to do with it to provide a balanced and a resource mix that will accelerate the transition. When we looked at if you look at the different categories, resource categories, like the slide that Lauren already showed, where energy efficiency, we're pretty much on track for that kind of lower level of energy efficiency anyway. The same thing is true for the renewables. We're going to get probably close to 3,500 megawatts already in the IRPs and the other RFPs that the investor-owned utilities in the region already have. We're going to get, several hundred megawatts of demand response from efforts the utilities are, on the way to making. This plan does not really advance the forward-looking resource strategy, the accelerated transformation like we would hope. It does the basics, but doesn't really take that next big step.
Yeah, thanks. No, that's really helpful. I mean, I think it also sort of speaks to one of the other things I was wondering about a little bit, right? Because we've got, a lot of the IOUs are already sort of working on their IRPs, right? And they were probably working on their BCPs for November. And so I know it seems like the impacts, especially to goals, seem heavier for, like BPA at this point, but I am kind of curious the sort of extent to which, you feel like the implications of this are going to flow down to the IOUs and their portfolios as well.
And that gets back to, it gets back to a previous question, which is that the plan provides guidance to the investor-owned utilities, but not any real direct requirements. Whereas for Bonneville and indirectly for public power, and there's one more exception I'll mention in a moment, it does require Bonneville to follow the planning in the power plan or explain why it's not doing it. So in effect, it becomes not exactly binding, but has a strong influence. The additional exception is the Washington I-937, EIA does have requirements for Washington utilities to follow the plan for energy efficiency.
Yeah, and I think just to put a finer point on that, timing is an issue here where we have biennial conservation plans, which are currently in development and will be filed, I believe, in October. And those are based on the 7th plan targets. So it would really be, I think, a concern for the next round of planning. And of course, the EIA requires that those Washington utilities use the most recent version of the power plan. So that is certainly a concern.
And the EIA is the Energy Independence Act.
Yes, thank you, Nancy.
So that actually does tie the power plan to where the IOUs are actually getting their targets from. Yeah, got it. Thanks.
Mhm. Marty Gibbons asked a question about the lack of energy storage in the plan and the modeling, and if you could talk a little bit about kind of what our thoughts are on what that really means, and how important that kind of omission as a separate resource is, as opposed to they do include some renewable plus storage resources, but not really much storage on its own.
Yeah, this is a generic problem with all the current models, and some facilities for dealing with it. But really the question is how you value flexibility in the modeling. Traditionally, the models basically said, okay, you have a resource that costs this much and provides this much power. So, it's cheaper than that other thing. So pick that one first and then pick the next one if you need it. Now we have to look at that was an oversimplification of reality to begin with. But now what we're looking at is we have a lot of old thermal power plants, coal, and then eventually gas coming off the system that provided kind of a complete resource. You have energy, capacity, maybe some flexibility. The coal plants don't really. And when you put in renewables, they provide energy. And of course, it does have variability to it. How do you find complementary resources that fit everything together and really gives you a better system? You don't end up having to run a coal plant in the middle of the night when you don't need it, or a gas plant, that we have a better fit. We'll have better economics. We'll have much lower environmental impacts. But it's a more complicated system in some ways to run because you need to fit all the pieces together. The models don't do that, and the models leave out the flexibility, really have difficulty looking forward to say, okay, what's if I have a storage resource I could charge to, right now at noon, will I be able to use it at 8 p.m. or will I be able to use it on Wednesday? A lot of the models have difficulty dealing with that. And so in the council's modeling, which is not, it's a good model, but it's not as sophisticated as we probably need. The storage has basically dropped out because of the way that the other resources, a lot of renewables, you have a big hydro system, which is after all the biggest storage system in North America, basically. And although it does have some limits, it's very big and it's very flexible. And when you add all those things together, and just the high cost of pump storage or battery storage right now, even in combination with other good resources where we know that those combinations are very valuable going forward, the model's not picking them. Now, in the decarbonization scenario, yes, the model does, because now you have to retire the coal faster and make other changes on the system. And in that case, the inherent value of storage really does emerge. So going back to Marty's question, yes, the lack of energy storage is a problem for relevance.
So I want to, at this point, kind of open it up. Hal Nelson has a question that about transmission. Jeff Hammerland had some questions back on energy efficiency and all the values. If folks want to, please raise your hand if you want to jump in with a question. Be happy to take more questions.
And we can go beyond the end of the hour here for anybody who wants to stay on and talk more. We're happy to do that.
Yep. So one of the things we had set up, thank you for mentioning that, Fred. I forgot to mention it. You know, we had planned this for an hour, but we left an hour and a half in case folks did want to stay on. And so we have the time to stay, but we wanted to be mindful of other folks' time. So we planned our presentation to really muscle through it so folks could get on. But if Hal, if you want to ask your question, Jeff, if you want to follow up on the energy efficiency, all the benefits, you're welcome to, if you're still on.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Yeah, just a quick question for Fred or whoever. You know, I haven't dug into the assumptions about build out for transmission or the availability of existing transmission, but it seems like if we're going to rely on cheap renewables from the Southwest, we need to be sure that we can get those here and not be diverted to power hungry LA or some other jurisdiction that's having a polar vortex or a heat dome. And so, and it seems like we need, you know, a bunch more transmission, which is really impossible to build. So what's your take on the realism of the transmission assumptions in those plans?
The council's transmission, like I say, their perspective on transmission is limited. I mean, not that they don't care, but they don't have the analytical tools really. And they, in my personal opinion, have not had enough interplay with the big transmission owners and with the planning bodies in the region and with the Western Electricity Coordinating Council. But, you know, I think we all sense that we're going to need more transmission, but we also need to start with the notion of getting more out of the system that we've got. And Bonneville, to its credit, and other, you know, transmission owners have spent a fair bit of time upgrading their systems, adding more capability to, you know, do situational awareness and a lot of technical work to deal with improving power flows through various kinds of devices, you know, and we can get a bit more out of the system when that happens. But we're also going to need new transmission to reach the new renewables, you know, where they provide the best value to the grid. One of my favorite examples being, you know, we have kind of a area of really good solar resources in Central Oregon that we don't have transmission to get to. And that's true, you know, for other, you know, solar and other resources around the region, and wind in Montana in particular. But also to expand the network so that when the system has problems like we saw in early July with the bootleg fire, which cut 5,500 megawatts of transmission to California for several days during a very big heat wave down there. It was really a close call. You know, can we find other routes for the power than the ones we've currently got? But we also know new transmission lines take 5 to 15 years to build. Lots of review has to happen. There's, you know, considerable concern about, you know, from the people who are within view of those or being affected by them, that those are legitimate issues, and the cost. It's really expensive. So this is a real dilemma. My view is that we need to take the system that we've got and, you know, expand its use as much as we can over the next decade. And within a couple of years, we have to decide what new lines do we really need to build in the Northwest to provide more access to renewables and to provide more reliability. Now, I should also mention that Oregon and Washington are both doing projects right now with some support from the Defense Department to take an initial statewide look at the issue of how to develop new renewables and new transmission within each state. That's something I hope all 4 states will end up doing. We're probably going to need a couple rounds of it to get it to really surface the key questions, you know, what new line should we build? And there's also significant opportunity to build offshore wind starting in the South Oregon coast, along with the Humboldt area in Northern California. That will need new transmission as well, but it also has benefits in balancing the flows into the I-5 corridor, which would then open up more transmission access across the Cascades. So, you know, all these pieces kind of fit together. The council's plan doesn't really directly address transmission in that way.
And Nancy, I'll ask my question if I'm unmuted. Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are, Jeff. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
great. Okay, thanks. I'll flush my question out a little bit more than what I have in the chat. So when I was still a professor at Portland State University, I would often invite Jim Lazar to come in and speak to our energy policy classes. And I had a lot of Bonneville people in those classes. They were not immersed in energy efficiency like Terry is, but they were open to looking at this. And Jim would explain his layer cake of benefits, and he would talk about the healthcare benefits and everything else. That seemed to be a huge eye-opening to a lot of people in the class, even people in the energy efficiency world. And one of the stories I tend to tell when I explain this issue to folks who are not immersed in this stuff like we are, is I said, you know, Portland State University, our class was recommending to the facilities people at Portland State University that they looked at a product. It's called Enlighted. It basically was like energy efficient lighting that would dim when there's no one in the room, and it would move along so it had the demand response as well as energy efficiency benefits. And we looked at all the models and explained how the cost effectiveness, I was going to save the university a bunch of money. But what folks really cared about was nothing to do with those system benefits. They were very practical, real world benefits to the constituents, to the audience. For example, the security people realized, oh my God, when somebody starts stealing computers from people's offices, we can track exactly how they're leaving the building, which exit they're going through, so we can nab them right there. And the facilities people were saying, oh my God, I really now will know when a room is being occupied or not being occupied, not what the planning schedule says, but we'll have real-time data for this. So those were the things, those were the benefits that they cared about. They love the energy efficiency, of course. Anyway, there seems to be some way that we need to move beyond just looking at the system benefits and somehow incorporating these many other benefits, as difficult as that is to try to quantify, but it just seems to be missing that whole piece.
And Jeff, I would add, I mean, we're hoping that some of that will fold into the equity work that the council is calling for. You know, I would say, while they are sort of identifying a need for additional work to try to get the data that's necessary to figure out how to equitably distribute, you know, energy efficiency based on some of these other benefits, they're not necessarily owning that as the council's role. And so, you know, pushing on them to sort of recognize that, you know, the council is the entity that really should be taking a lead on a regional approach to some of these questions, rather than kind of just saying, well, we recommend the region look at this, but then not necessarily wanting to take it on themselves. I would say that's one of the messages that we're planning to convey.
Because I think the Energy Trust is taking some good steps there, but they're still relative baby steps in my opinion compared to what could be done.
Any other questions from folks? There is a question about site-based and distributed generation, distributed storage. Are those included?
Yes, they do. The council does look at those resources. It doesn't really do a very detailed assessment of, you know, where they'll go, but something like rooftop solar can go anywhere after all. But I think that, you know, this gets back to another issue, which is a lot of the council relies on public data. And I think that's correct as a general approach. For example, on resource costs, where you have resource costs that are going down fast because of technology innovation and market expansion, the public data lags behind where the costs actually are or where they're going to be. And we've had a lot of back and forth with the council staff about that issue. In general, I think a lot of the new stuff that we like has that characteristic of declining cost, And, I have kind of a technical debate about whether the council's numbers are in fact reasonable. And I have a tendency to think that for things like distributed generation and for storage in particular, that the cost profiles in the council plan are too high. Would that make a big difference if we reduce the cost quite a bit? Maybe. But I think in general, the council does a pretty good job of trying to, be very transparent about their data sources and be very thorough about what they get.
Thanks, Betsy, for that question. Hal Nelson asks about the kind of secondary benefits, economic benefits of local investments. Does the council look at if we build more in the region, if we do more energy efficiency, increasing of discretionary spending, if we build more in the region, we create economic benefits locally as opposed to bringing in imports. Does the council track those economic factors?
The way I would put that is the council would say that their view is shaped by the Northwest Power Act, and they're focused on the economics of the resources and the available and so forth and reliable. And I think realistically those other factors do play a role. It's part of our, what we want to bring to the council is that it's not just the economic benefits that we're after, the reliability benefits. We're also after the broader benefits of a clean energy economy, but the council's legal scope, doesn't require it to go that far. But I think those are good points to make, and they don't typically, for example, look at employment effects and so forth in their analysis.
Is that something that we could roll into the DEI analysis though? Because it seems like it's, it's relevant there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And speaking of the DEI, the council had a very good series of consultations, I guess, with all of their advisory committees. And then they had a system integration forum, kind of an all committee meeting back in February that was quite good. They had some outside experts to come in and help run that to create a perspective on, diversity, equity, inclusion, which I think turned out pretty well. But the plan itself basically says the council will convene some workshops. And I think that they should go beyond that.
Yep. Are there any final questions? If you want to unmute yourself, go ahead, ask your last questions. Any final questions?
Oh, I think Marty might be trying to ask a question. There you are.
Yes, I was trying to, I didn't press the right button. Circling back to the energy storage, is distributed energy storage, I understand it could benefit the transmission requirements. In other words, smooth out the transmission needs, over a cycle. And is that just a complexity like some of the others that is beyond the scope of the modeling right now? Or should that be taken, or is there an opportunity to take that into consideration, or is that really not a good factor to consider?
I could take a swing at that unless you want to, Lauren.
Well, I was just going to say, avoided transmission is part of what is considered in the normal sort of quantification of the cost effectiveness criteria, but the extent to which that is also used on the distributed storage, I don't know, Fred.
Well, so I think our view is now we like to talk about customer side resources as a broad category. And what that means is you're taking energy efficiency, demand response, flexible demand, behind the meter storage, rooftop solar, other kinds of clean distributed generation, and all those things fit together as kind of a package. Yes, they're very separate categories, but from a planning perspective, if we're able to manage demand more effectively and provide more assurance around what the demand will be, that gives the system operators a lot better shot at operating the system better. And it also means we can project that forward into the future and say, okay, as a result of managing demand better, we diminish the need for peak resource flows across the grid, and that decreases the need for new transmission. I think, you can trace that out. So it's not just a question of each individual resource on the customer side, but all of them together. And can those be operated as a portfolio, as an ensemble? And, you might remember we were talking about, the grid harmony, a couple of years ago, the harmonious grid. That's really the kind of underlying concept, is to get the customer side to be as important, really, in its own way, a factor in grid management as the rest of the system is.
Okay, thank you. Hal, did you still have your hand up?
No, my arm got tired, so I'm going to put it down now.
All right, Brian, we'll move on to you.
Fred, what role do you see for demand flexibility and smart hot water heaters in this plan?
There's not much in there now. The council's analysis did not select the programmatic demand response or flexible demand, much to my regret, because the council this time, in the seventh plan, the council had an outside consultant. They did a good report. It was a top-down report. This time we had a bottom-up process where the demand response advisory committee sat around and went through all the different kinds of, residential, commercial, industrial demand response and all the different categories. And the utilities were very active, the ones that have experience with this. We did a bottom-up assessment that ended up with pretty much the same result as the seventh plan, but a lot more detail and a lot more knowledge now about how we can accomplish this. Because with a couple of exceptions, the Northwest doesn't really have very much demand response at all. Idaho Power has always done a fair bit. Portland General Electric is beginning to do a lot more of their flexible load plan and the DR test bed. But, it's not something we have a lot of experience with. What we know from the assessment that the magnitude of this is really large. 2,500 to 3,500 megawatts, depending on the season. Think of that as being like 10% of overall system demand, if we can put all the pieces together. But the plan, the modeling didn't pick the programmatic conservation. It only picked distribution voltage reduction, which is kind of aligned with or sort of next to conservation voltage reduction. Distribution DVR is what you do only on peak. CVR is what you do all the time. Anyway, there's a fair bit of it. It's really cheap. So the model picked that. And it also picked time of use rate type demand response, but not the programs that go with it, including the grid integrated water heaters.
Right.
Washington and Oregon, all the new water heaters will have the plug for grid integration starting next year. The CTA 2045, it's like a USB for appliances, but we have very little action yet to acquire that and be able to manage that. The great thing about water heaters is they can be managed in a way that the customers almost never will know that there's a utility management thing happening with it. It's not like an air conditioner where you definitely know when the thing is being turned off for demand response. You can shape the resource pretty well, and it's really cheap. But the council plan does not include that resource at this point.
Yeah, and I would just highlight in response to this, Brian, one of the things that we heard the council members say a lot was, okay, well, there might be more demand response out there that provides value to individual utilities, but that doesn't mean that we can rely on it as a regional, a cost-effective resource for the region. And I do feel like this example in particular, that is not really a very good reason for excluding it, because we know that this equipment is going to be available now, and it's going to be available during the action period. And so ignoring that fact, I think, is just kind of putting some blinders on instead of actually thinking about, well, what are customers going to actually be buying?
Yep.
Thanks.
Yep. Lori, looks like you might have your hand up. Lori Byron.
Yes, and I'm a neophyte too, as someone else said on the chat. But as far as I can tell, I'm the only person from Montana on the call. And given that the comments are going on tonight, can you help me? Does this just guide Bonneville Power? This has nothing to do with the electric companies in the states. Is that correct?
So really quick, Lori, I'll jump in on this. So we had a call on Friday with a group of Montana folks to kind of do a preview of this and get people teed up to participate in the public hearing. So I will provide to you separately after this call the materials that we provided to that group. But this is, it's looking at the region as a whole, which traditionally has been the Bonneville footprint. But that I think includes, while it primarily affects sort of the co-ops and the public utilities that are customers of Bonneville, it certainly has implications for utility planning outside of Bonneville. So, I would say the answer to your question, I can't remember exactly how you phrased it, but I think the answer is yes.
Well, in particular, Northwestern Energy,
Yes.
is partially in the quote unquote Northwest region for the power plant's purposes and partly not.
Yeah.
The Colstrip power plant is included in the region because it was built for the rest of, not only for Montana, but for the West side. But the service territory issues, it's a little complicated with Montana, but Montana has 2 of the 8 votes on the council, and Montana has a pretty significant portion, a little corner of the Northwest Hydro system up there in Northwest Montana, and is a significant factor here. So we really appreciate it if you're able to make the, go on to the hearing and make some comments or send something in writing, and happy to talk to you more about that.
Yeah.
It's kind of, Montana is for a lot of reasons, kind of an exceptional place.
So thank you, everybody, for participating. Lauren, you had some wrap-up comments you wanted to make. I want to thank Lauren and Fred for all of their work on this and kind of leading our effort. And folks should feel free to follow up if they have further questions. Lauren?
Yeah. Thanks, Nancy. Absolutely. And I just wanted to let folks know, Fred and I are certainly available anytime if you want to reach out, if you have specific questions about what's in the plan, what's not in the plan, where do I find, whatever sort of analysis. And we're happy to, provide input or feedback or suggestions for specific comments during the comment period. I did want to emphasize, for the next 2 weeks, as we're going through these public comment hearings, it is really important for people to show up. We've been, tracking this process over the last several years leading up to the release of the draft. And, there's not a whole lot of people that show up at the council, especially during these remote times. And so I think, just want to emphasize the importance of showing up for the public comment hearings. You get 2 to 3 minutes, right? So we would encourage being, very to the point, very, provide some specific feedback that then the council members can remember and, take back the messaging that they're hearing from constituents. We, again, I think have detected some reluctance at the council towards public participation, and just want to reemphasize that this is an important part of the process and that they are accountable to the public and stakeholders and should be responding to public feedback. At the same time, we also know that our members and allies will be respectful in those comments to the council. There have been times when people show up and maybe haven't been as constructive, but we have 100% faith in our members and allies that you will be respectful to the council members. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Lauren, I wanted to reinforce what you just said. Jeff Hammerland here. I used to work for the U.S. Senate Energy Committee and helped develop the Northwest Power Act. And it included a very explicit public involvement component. I mean, right in the act, one of the 3 legs of the stool was that the public needed to be involved, and we no longer wanted to have a region where the utilities and or Bonneville Power Administration made all the calls. We wanted to have public involvement. So this is very important. This would be the 6th or 7th public involvement period I've had, because I'm a very old guy now, and so I've been around a long time. A bunch of them was early on was representing the Public Power Council, so I was representing the utility perspective, but more recently, more the public interest perspective, and it really does matter. I mean, I have seen genuine changes. Yes, they're not fundamental changes, but there are significant changes at the margins, at least, that have come out of comments that Northwest Energy Coalition members and their allies have made during the public comment period.
Thanks, Jeff. So with that, I think we've reached the end of our webinar today. And again, as always, happy to engage in any further conversations that folks want to have about the plan. You know, once we hit that November 19th end of the public comment hearing, the council basically goes behind a wall and we can't talk to them anymore. So this is our time right now to tell them what we think, and we look forward to working with you all.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.